Welcome to The Last 50 Feet, the podcast about what happens when autonomous vehicles actually arrive at the curb. Every week, we get into what is moving in autonomous commerce, what's stalling, and who's building what next. No fluff, all signal, and we keep it brief. That's our thing. Let's get into it.
Welcome to another episode of The Last 50 Feet. The standard cast of characters back with us today. We have CEO Ben Saddle, we have producer Kyle, but most importantly today we have with us the Rideshare Guy, Harry Campbell. Welcome.
Gentlemen, and producer Kyle, excited to be here, ready to get into it.
Happy to have you with us. So I think maybe a place to start today, Harry, is just walk us through what made you one of the more leading voices in this rideshare space. You have an aerospace engineering degree. You start doing a little driving on the side, to earn some money, and now we're here. Fill in the gaps for us a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'll give you the quick and dirty version, but basically, as you mentioned, I used to be an aerospace engineer for Boeing, so kind of retired that degree and haven't busted it out in a while, and please don't ask me to, but I started driving for Uber and Lyft over a decade ago in 2014, and, started writing about my experience on my blog, The Rideshare Guy, started a YouTube channel, and then, of course, the companies exploded and started raising billions of dollars and hiring hundreds of thousands and millions of drivers. So, I think I was creating good content, but definitely got lucky and fortuitous with the timing. And I've been riding Uber and Lyft's coattails ever since. So now, I think anyone who's ever Googled or searched any box on the internet for anything related to Uber and Lyft driving, I'm guessing and hoping that we've popped up because we reach millions of drivers every single month and, have a pretty strong foothold. We're publishing multiple articles a week, videos, we do a live show, podcasts, published a book, courses, you name it, every box, social media, every box on the internet. And so that's kind of what we're best known for over on the Rideshare Guy, and sort of where I've gained most of my experience covering the industry.
And so is it safe to say that the Rideshare Guy is a media outlet that really helps rideshare drivers learn more about the industry that they're in, how they can get tips and advice on making more money or being more efficient or understanding regulations? I mean, it's kind of a destination source for them to get information about, what they're doing every day when on these different platforms, which platforms to use. And I think you're kind of the guru, helping give that information in a very detailed way to this massive network of millions of active drivers at any given time.
Well, I think there was a site that came and went called the Rideshare Guru, so be careful with the branding. I'm the Rideshare Guy, but
gonna get a cease and desist here.
Yeah, no, I think I probably sent more cease and desists than received. But I mean, even 10 years in, I feel like I'm still workshopping the best way to describe the Rideshare Guy and what it does. My latest thing I've been asking people, I say, oh, do you know the points guy? And I'll say, we're kind of like the points guy, but for Uber and Lyft drivers. And the only problem with that is only half the people I've mentioned that to know what the points guy is. So it's not really working out that well. But I think you described it aptly. It's basically, if you're an Uber and Lyft driver, we're going to help you figure out what it takes, how to make more money, product reviews, services, interviews with executives, drivers, basically everything and anything you might need. And I think that actually, because it's hard to describe and because people often wonder, like, isn't it kind of easy? Like, do you really need a whole site, 10 years and, hundreds and thousands of articles and videos to help Uber and Lyft drivers? I think that's actually the opportunity that I stumbled on with Uber and Lyft driving, is that it actually isn't that easy. I mean, you can just go out and do it, but if you want to maximize your earnings, if you want to, how to deal with the once in a while when someone pukes in the car, if you want to deal with pickups and drop-offs, as you guys know, that's actually the most challenging point of the whole experience as an Uber and Lyft driver. The customer wants to be dropped off right in front of the building, and there's nowhere to legally or safely park. And so even small stuff like that, we kind of coach, advise, and then really also a lot of times it boils down to helping drivers make more money. And so I think that's sort of really, I'm not an expert, I'm sure we'll talk more about AVs in today's episode. I've never been an expert on AVs, but I do think it's fair to say I'm an expert on rideshare, on the business of rideshare, the commercialization aspect, and all of that I just described, I think applies to AVs, and maybe even more impactful, right? Because it's so easy for a driver to understand, where to pick up, where not to pick up, where to drop off, where not to drop off. And even though they may do it legally or illegally, right? When it comes to AVs, obviously, there are, that's what, I think your whole company is predicated on, making that pickup and drop off experience easier, and everything that goes into the operations behind the scenes. So that was, kind of the high level of what we're up to on the Rideshare Guy.
And so at what point did you start getting interested in autonomous vehicles? I know, that transition started to pique your curiosity, over the last
Yeah.
couple, but like, what was the moment or the kind of
Yeah.
catalyst where you decided, hey, now is actually the time? Because AVs have had fits and starts over the last 10 years as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people believed that the time was now 5-6 years ago, and it wasn't, and
Yeah.
now we're back again. And so, what made this moment in time special for you, and kind of the moment where you wanted to start transitioning some of your knowledge and expertise into this new technology of autonomous vehicles?
Well, I think you even mentioned that, the AV revolution has been happening for the past 10 years, right? I think we're kind of in AV 2.0, but AV 1.0 that happened 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when there was all this hype and sort of boom and kind of a bit of a bust cycle. I think I was interested in it at the time, but it didn't. I think I was so focused on the Rideshare Guy and building that up and the opportunity there, that even though I saw this shiny object over on the side with AVs, it didn't really concern me. And it also didn't pique my personal interest as much. I think that's one thing, just as an entrepreneur, that I've always attracted myself to, is I think the three things I look for in any business, any new business, any ongoing business, anything that I open up my computer and work on, I always try to consider, basically, am I interested in this topic? Does it excite me? Is it helping people? And then number three, although I guess it might be number two, can I make money? Because I am an entrepreneur and a capitalist, so I do like to make money. So, it's always some combination. Obviously, if someone offers me $1 million to hop on a 1-hour call to talk about something I hate, I'll still do it. But, I'm trying to balance those three things. And so I think the Rideshare Guy is still, I would say, doing very well. I kind of like to joke that it's a little bit on cruise control. I don't spend a ton of time creating content anymore. I mean, for 5 years, I created every piece of content, or almost every piece of content. Then I edited every piece of content for another few years. And, along the way, I've been hiring contributors, editors, advertising guys, along the way, to sort of help me run that business. And, so I think on a personal level, just my interest, and, you can only talk about what it's like to not have someone puke in the back of your car as an Uber and Lyft driver. So I guess I would say my personal interest is not in that side of things as much as it used to be, but my team is doing a great job of kind of carrying the torch. I'm still 100% owner of the Rideshare Guy and sort of running that forward for me. And then it allows me to spend time on other areas, whether it's the conference and live events business that we do at Curbivore, and the Urban Autonomy Summit, which we just did in Detroit. And I know you guys are going to be joining us in Austin. Or, I think the big one, as you mentioned, I started the Driverless Digest about 1.5 years ago. And I think the inflection point for me was honestly taking Waymo. I'm here in Los Angeles, and I took a ride, and I was thinking to myself, dude, this is awesome. Just like everyone else that gets into a Waymo or a self-driving vehicle. And then, of course, I saw them raising billions of dollars, and I thought to myself, hey, there might be some good commercial opportunity here. And I think for me, it was, again, less, I'm not an expert on AVs, but I think the business of AVs, that's sort of where I can speak to, and that's where I can provide my expertise. So I think that's the lens in which we try to cover the AV industry. I don't pretend to be an expert in the technology and, end to end versus 1.0. I probably know enough to be dangerous, but I do know a lot about the other side, the operations, the commercializations, the revenue potential, the market, where they're operating and where they're not operating. So that's what I try to cover and speak to on the Driverless Digest.
That's actually fascinating for me, because I would say it's a one-to-one analogy for the journey that I had founding Autolane. And in your instance, it was taking your first Waymo ride. And for me, it was using Tesla's FSD for the very first time on my brand new car in August of 2024. And I was absolutely blown away by the quality of the self-driving capabilities, but B, the idea that this could scale to consumer cars, and that the rest of the OEMs around the world would also be adopting this technology someday. And I had this kind of aha moment that this is, to me, and again, similar to you, I don't have a background in automotive or autonomous driving, but I was fascinated and I suppose obsessed enough with that initial magical feeling of being driven around by a car, and especially a car that you own,
Yeah.
that I kind of couldn't quit the kind of fascination with where this was all headed. And that was the genesis of Autolane. And it's cool to hear that you had kind of a similar experience with your first Waymo ride, and that spawned everything you've been doing since on Driverless Digest. So
Yeah.
it certainly
Well,
has the technology certainly has that kind of gravitas, I think, the first time you use it, whether it's a
yeah.
Tesla or a Waymo or a Zoox or an AV ride.
Yeah.
If you've never experienced this before, the gulf in your knowledge and imagination, understanding of where transportation's headed versus someone who has, it's like it's night and day. And I think that's part of the challenge that you're helping with from an industry perspective, is getting people to get comfortable with this new
Yeah.
technology, introducing it to people, giving people kind of real and honest feedback on the different companies, the different services, the different opportunities, and encouraging people to go ahead and try it out. Doesn't Just because you try it doesn't mean you have to become a fanatic, but largely speaking, I think when you do try this technology for the first time, it allows you at least to grapple with and understand some of the changes that are about to take place in society and transportation writ large. And so I certainly applaud all of the efforts that you do from the different venues that you described for just getting people comfortable with the fact that this technology is here, it's safe, it's accessible, and give it a try. And if you don't like it,
Yeah.
that's totally okay. But also, you should for sure be informed about what this technology can do in order to kind of make decisions. There's a lot of politicians I speak to and community leaders who've frankly never experienced autonomous vehicle technology. They've never been in a Waymo. They've never used Tesla full self-driving, and they're sitting in a position of power to make sweeping decisions about how this technology impacts society or community, but yet they've never even tried it. And I think it's imperative that we get as many people as we can, uh, at least experiencing it once, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important that the outlets like you have are spreading that message and encouraging people to get involved.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting that you mentioned Tesla FSD as your first experience with autonomy. This is actually a topic we covered in Detroit at our Urban Autonomy Summit. We had Patrick George from the Wall Street Journal who moderated a great panel, and we kind of talked about that owned versus public, kind of robotaxi nature of AVs. And I think actually you're right. I think a lot of the introduction that people have already had or will have, you kind of don't think about it, but is going to be through more of a consumer angle. It's going to be through a Tesla FSD. I mean, every decent car now that you buy has, lane keep, right, which basically keeps you in the lane, or cruise control assist, which prevents you from hitting the car in front of you. And, that's kind of like the base, I would say that's like the majority of value. Tesla FSD is on another level, but like if I had to have something, that's what I would ask for, right? Keep me in the lane on a freeway on a 2-hour drive and not hit the car in front of me. Obviously, it's super nice once it starts changing lanes for you and getting from the 405 to the 10 freeway, and Tesla kind of goes above and beyond that. But I think if you had to ask for something, that's what it would be. And I think that's kind of where we're at an interesting inflection point with AV, because Waymo is doing 500,000 trips a week, which sounds like a lot when you look at their numbers on its own. Wow, they're growing, it's exponential, they're doing great, they're in all these cities. Uber and Lyft, though, if you look at just New York City alone, where we have public data from the TLC, the Taxi and Limousine Commission, they actually do 700,000 trips every single day, and that's one city.
Wow.
Right. So it's like, okay, if you look at them compared to Uber and Lyft and all of their top cities, it's like they are a fraction. And so just think about how many people actually haven't taken a
Correct.
Waymo yet. And so that's why I think it's kind of a cool inflection point and a fun time to cover the industry. In addition to all of the neat AV companies, the startups like Autolane, everyone that's kind of building and looking to move the industry forward, myself included.
It's funny. So the Rideshare Guy and the Driverless Digest kind of have like there's a bit of contention there.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how like we started with the rideshare, we're now with the Driverless Digest. Did the communities have a little bit of friction or contention in between them at this point?
I mean, to be honest, people always ask me, oh, what do human drivers think about AVs? And as you might imagine, they do not like them, right? Human drivers, they really don't like any additional supply, right? That's the inherent tension between drivers and the platforms like Uber and Lyft. Like as an individual driver, I want Ben to pay as much as possible right now for a ride and for me to capture as much of that fare because I'm never going to see him again. So I want to make as much money as possible right now, right? Whereas the companies, they kind of want the opposite. They want a 3 to 5 minute reliable ETA for Ben. They don't care about the driver or the car. They want you calling an Uber or calling a Lyft and getting that reliable experience at a reliable price point. That's why they have surge pricing, and their ideal situation is actually not Ben paying 5x for a ride. They actually want a little bit more supply than demand. So at all times, the market is in perfect balance. And obviously that doesn't always happen, but that's kind of their goal. And so I think that inherent tension speaks a lot to, hey, additional supply is bad. When additional supply for human drivers comes in the form of robo-taxis, that's really bad because it's like, hey, no one wants their job taken by a robot right now, right? And so I think that's kind of the issue that we're seeing right now with human drivers. They're I would say they don't like AVs, but also AVs, Waymo, are an easy scapegoat. We worked with a company called Gridwise who published a report, and we looked at what human drivers were making in AV cities versus non-AV cities, and it was actually only 3 to 5% less. So as you might imagine, right, AVs add supply to the marketplace. And if demand doesn't outpace the new supply, then driver earnings are going to go down. And that's exactly what we saw. Now, 3 to 5%, that is not ideal. Drivers are making less money. But right now, drivers are probably making 10% less because of high gas prices. So, in covering the industry for 10 years, I mean, really the same 5 problems for drivers have always existed. They don't make enough money. Uber and Lyft take too much percent of the fare. Their take rate's too high. They can be unfairly deactivated. There's not enough training. You're putting too many miles on your car. And so I sort of feel like I think all of those concerns are very valid for human drivers, but I don't actually think AVs have really changed the game that much yet for human drivers when you look at the numbers, but they are kind of a bit scary, an easy scapegoat. So I think all of the subjective feelings that drivers have about AVs are totally valid. But and that's kind of really the whole crux of the Rideshare Guy is that, hey, we say, hey, if you're doing this job, there's lots of ways to out earn the average. There's lots of ways to make a lot more than 3 to 5% if you know where to drive, when to drive, what types of rides, what type of vehicles, what type of areas. If gas is expensive, maybe you should try food delivery or grocery delivery because you put a lot fewer miles on your car. There's a lot of strategies out there that you can employ. And so that's kind of where we're landing right now with human drivers. But yeah, definitely fair to say they're not big fans of AVs. And to be honest, we kind of keep the audience is pretty separate. On the Rideshare Guy, we're publishing content there, and on the Driverless Digest, we're publishing content there. Sometimes there's an intersection, but we're not like sending every AV email to every driver in our audience and reminding them that like, hey, all these drivers are, or all these AVs are trying to take your job.
I'm curious about the human rideshare side of your experience, and something I think about quite a bit is I don't know if you have the statistics on this or not, but you certainly probably have a pretty good guess, I would imagine. But if you were to look at the active pool of rideshare drivers at this exact moment in the United States, let's say, how many of them are doing it, let's say, as a full-time job, or at least are doing it consistently over years, versus how many people are just doing it to kind of patch an income gap and making a little bit extra side change for 3 or 4 months, and then they turn it off and don't go back? Like, what's the general breakdown of people that are doing it very, very seriously to pay their rent or mortgage versus the people that are just doing it as a stopgap?
Yeah.
So about 70 to 80% of Uber and Lyft drivers are part-time. So they're doing 20 to 25 hours a week or less. And we've done surveys every year going back a decade. Uber and Lyft have done a number of surveys. So I think the data on this is actually pretty clear that most drivers are part-time. Think about the ads you see for Uber in the past to drive for Uber. They're not saying, come and sit in your car for 50 hours a week and drive like hell and, deal with traffic and it's gonna be really stressful. They're saying, oh, work whenever you want, cash out instantly. There's a lot of great features, and that's what we see. The two things when we survey human drivers: they love the earnings, right? They want to make money, and then they also love the flexibility. It's very easy to get onboarded, signed up, started to drive with Uber and Lyft, as long as you meet the vehicle requirements, pass a background check. They have a product called Instant Pay that actually allows you, after every single trip, if you want, you can cash out your pay to your bank account. Like, I don't think there's any other job in the world that's similar, where you can really easily get signed up and started. You go out and drive whenever you want, make $100, and you could not drive for them again for 2 years, come back in 2 years, make $100, right? That just kind of, no one uses it like that, but that highlights the flexibility. But on the other end of the coin, you do have about 20% of drivers who are doing essentially full time. So they're 40 hours a week or more. We call them the power drivers. And those 20% of drivers actually make up a majority of the total trips and miles on the platform. So they make up about 50 to 60% of the miles driven on the platform, which, if you think about the math, that makes sense, right? They're driving 40 to 50 hours a week. So they're putting a lot more miles and trips and hours on their car. And these are often the drivers that you hear kind of complaining the loudest, and maybe rightfully so, because they're working just like employees. You don't have a lot of flexibility if you work 40 to 50 hours a week. You got to drive all the busy times. You probably have to drive the party hours, Friday, Saturday nights, holidays, when you can make the most amount of money, rush hour during the week, in the mornings and the afternoons. You still have more flexibility than a normal 40-hour week job. But, there's a lot less than someone like me who's like, oh, maybe I'll drive, just the night times or just Friday nights when I can maximize my earnings and do 5 hours a week and, make 30, $40 an hour because I cherry pick the best hours. So we do see that dynamic where a small number of drivers are making up a majority of the hours on the platform. And those drivers are, kind of I call them like they're working like employees, but paid like independent contractors. So, there's a lot of drivers who have figured it out and make the system work, but it's definitely, I think, a tougher spot if you're doing it like that.
Right. So safe to say, I suppose, then that 20% of the what you call the power drivers are a lot more sensitive to, let's say, the gas price situation or the 3 to 5% decline because of an AV presence in a given city. That's ultimately impacting the income that they're relying upon on a monthly basis because they're doing it full time or more than full time, let's say, which is something I've not really considered. I suppose that's the group that is probably most interested in understanding what the autonomous vehicle technology and transportation movement will do to the industry. They probably really need to figure that out.
Yeah. So the full-time drivers, they are and they aren't affected by some of these factors because, yeah, gas is one that I think is acute. You fill up 3, 4, 5 times a week. A full-time Uber and Lyft driver will do over 1,000 miles a week on their car. So when you think about like the normal driver, I do 1,000, a lot of leases or 1,000 miles a month or 10,000 miles a year. Like, drivers are literally doing 4 or 5x that in a single week. And so you have to fill up, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. And, who would have thought, a driver driving around the city puts a lot of miles on their car. But when you think about the quantity, it is a lot. And so what we have found, though, with a lot of these full-time drivers, they've kind of figured out the system, right? Like, that's the big thing. There's a ton of variability. We see this on both the driver and the customer side. There's a ton of reports out right now about Uber and Lyft pricing and how they charge different people different prices. And it's all about, it's like this huge black box algorithm. Like, it depends where you're going, when you're going, if you're paying with your personal card or you got an Amex Platinum card. Oh, this is a rich guy. Let's charge them some more. I think it's all algorithm based. And I sort of take what the companies say with a grain of salt. But I do think that because of that variability, it allows drivers to really understand, hey, we tell in my book, the first thing I tell drivers, drive for both Uber and Lyft. Then you can almost double the requests that you have coming in. And then you get to decide, do I want request A that's 5 minutes away and going 10 miles and I'm going to make $12? Or do I want request B that's 2 minutes away? They're going a slightly shorter distance and I'll make $2 less. But the unpaid time, so we call this period 2. When I accept the trip and I have to drive to the customer, that's period 2. That's actually technically unpaid time, right? So you really want to minimize that unpaid time. So you actually might want the 2-minute request or the 3-minute request instead of the 5-minute request. You save 2 or 3 minutes, and you save, maybe half a mile or a mile. And so if you sort of think about that and you employ that, 50, 100 times a week, hundreds of times a month, thousands of times a year, you start making thousands of dollars more from very small changes in your strategy or whatever it might be. So I think those full-time drivers, they're definitely, affected by gas prices. They're thinking about AVs, but if they're working full-time, they've likely kind of already figured out the system and doing something that's working for them.
Kind of a hot question here. When you think about all of the expenses that go into being a power driver, is it still a good deal for them to drive 40 to 50 hours a week with all of that maintenance, especially with gas prices like they are right now? You're driving 1,000 miles a week rather than whatever, a couple hundred. Like, is the ROI there for those power drivers?
I mean, it's tough because it all depends on your perspective, right? If you've got no job and no car and you can go rent a Tesla Model 3 from Hertz and drive that on Uber, and you got to pay $400 or $500 a week, but you're willing to work 60 hours a week. And, I think that's actually a pretty good deal for someone in that position, right? If you've got good credit and you've got financing and you've got yourself, a nice new car, and maybe you have other job opportunities, then it's not such a good idea, right? And so I think that's I've over the past 10 years, I've been less caught up on judging, whether driving is a good or bad job, and more letting the market dictate, like, hey, there's 5 million people that want to drive for Uber and Lyft. Clearly they're doing something right. You could go work at McDonald's, you have all these other opportunities. And, we have plenty of complaining videos and articles. Obviously, it's fun to complain about your boss or your job. We've got plenty of that type of content. It does very well. But at the same time, I think my core thesis has always been, hey, if you want to do this job, we're going to help you do it better. We're going to help you make more money. And so I do think for the power drivers, it's challenging. But if you can figure out the system and make it work for you, and, your alternatives aren't better, I think it is a good gig.
What do you think about the power drivers who, or even I suppose any driver in rideshare that you just talked about, getting a Tesla from Hertz? But I've had a few examples of this over just the past 6 months, I think, where a rideshare driver is using FSD. Like, what's the rideshare community saying about doing that? Because I find it really funny and fascinating that that's going on right now.
Yeah, I think actually Uber's CEO, Dara Khosrowshahi, I saw an article, I actually pulled it up. It's in Business Insider. He said something about, like, he knows that some Tesla drivers are using full self-driving. And I was just in San Francisco last week or a few weeks ago, and I was, taking a few Waymos and Zooks and Robotaxi rides again. And I had this like similar, maybe it wasn't epiphany, maybe I read this article, but I basically posted a video on the Rideshare Guy, and I said, hey, if you're an Uber driver, go get a Tesla and just flip on FSD and like let it drive you around and your passengers all around. And like, you still got to sit there 40, 50, 60 hours a week. But man, that's a lot easier than, driving in San Francisco traffic. So I actually think it is a good idea. Some drivers are for sure already doing it. And, that's kind of like the types of strategies that we would talk about on the Rideshare Guy. Like, I think it is, driving in traffic is very stressful, right? Like the mental toll it takes on you. If you can squeeze out 5 extra hours because you're on FSD the whole time, but it doesn't feel like you work 5 extra hours, I think that's a big win.
It's a huge win. What I find really just interesting is the consumer perception of that. So I've also seen on the rider side, people complaining that the drivers are using FSD and quote unquote not driving. Well, they aren't driving. They're just supervising. And then people being like, well, I'm not going to pay this person to supervise an autonomous car. This is garbage. And so it's just a really awkward time, I think, where this transition is literally taking place on certain rides in Uber and Lyft, where I've been asked, usually I'm asked by the driver if it's okay if the driver can use FSD and turn it on. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'd love that personally,
You
because
might
I know
feel
that
safer with that than some of the drivers
FSD
around.
FSD is proven to be 7 times safer than the average human driver, and it's probably safe to say that a normal rideshare driver is an average human driver.
Yeah.
Some are better, some are worse, but if you were to assume that the average rideshare driver is also an average driver skill-wise, then turning on FSD as a rider is gonna get me a 7x safer experience per the data.
Yeah.
So I'm always happy when I get into a Tesla and then I can see that someone has it, and then they ask if they can deploy, and I say, absolutely, that's great. And then we're
Yeah.
both happy because now the driver is safer. I'm safer as the rider. The driver has a lot less work to do. And so everyone's basically winning when that button, that blue FSD button is hit in a rideshare scenario. And I'm all for that. And I don't know at what point is Uber and Lyft going to have to kind of formalize that or something, but it's certainly this like weird gray area right now between both the riders and the drivers when FSD gets employed into the mix.
Yeah. So this is something that I think drivers often struggle with, is handling these types of situations. And actually, it's pretty simple. What I would do as a driver, as soon as my passenger gets in the car, I would say something super casual and kind of not asking them the question, but more affirmative, like, hey, I typically use Tesla's full self-driving, which has been shown to be super safe. If you have an issue with that, just let me know and I'll turn it off. And then it's like, very affirmative. If they have an issue, they say something. And if you really wanted to be proactive, it'd be a little annoying for you. You could send that as a message as soon as the rider, you accept their trip, and then they have the opportunity to cancel it. And so, I think a lot of drivers aren't trained on customer service and, kind of employing these pretty like basic, we have an article on the Rideshare Guy that was popular. It's called like being the captain of your ship. Like you are the captain, right? Like I'm the captain now. I'm the boss. Like you're getting into my car. You are a customer. You are paying me, but you're kind of not the boss. Like I'm the boss, and you have to do it in a respectful and safe manner and everything that entails. But that's how I would personally handle it.
Similar to your background, I've been starting to do some Uber Eats driving myself, quote unquote driving,
Nice.
So that I can learn about that field and kind of how delivery takes place. Because of course, Autolane is building a platform and a technology that is enabling self-driving cars to transact and to do delivery and to accomplish things, run errands, what have you. So we're giving self-driving cars these kind of new abilities to not just think and drive, but to think, drive, and act.
Yeah, love it.
And so in order for me as CEO to really understand the product vision and kind of where things are heading, I need to understand what it's like to be a day in, day out delivery driver, whether that's Uber Eats or DoorDash or Instacart or what have you. But I've connected my car to Uber Eats and been doing some of that. And I fully use FSD while I'm doing that. And it's pretty fascinating, first off, to understand kind of how much of the delivery itself FSD can handle and where it still lacks. And what it's lacking is what you would imagine is the pickup and drop off. That's the part where it gets very hairy, and usually you need to take over and manually park the car because the car just isn't smart enough or isn't able to communicate or coordinate with the destination in order to get that transaction done. But we'll get there, I think, as an industry where the cars will be able to do pickup and drop off, particularly when it comes to delivery and logistics in a fairly straightforward manner and technical manner. But it's for me, when I've been doing Uber Eats deliveries using FSD in my car and not having to fight the traffic or the cognitive load that, and I'm sure your entire community can attest to what this means, but I think a lot of people have a very hard time, if they've not experienced autonomous vehicles before or self-driving technology, they have a very hard time estimating and calculating the actual cognitive load, meaning like the mental and physical work, but largely the mental work involved in driving. It is absolutely draining to do it, as you said, in traffic, but just to do it for multiple hours. Everybody will admit to that, But I think a lot of people won't admit to how serious it is. It is exhausting to do. And I think that's the promise of autonomous vehicle technology overall, which is that can at least, the minimum, reduce that mental and physical workload on a driver. And the question is the cost or the price of that technology worth not having to do as much of that mental and physical work, and you're now supervising a car instead of fully driving it. But in my experience, doing Uber Eats with FSD and not having to do the driving part, just having to do the pickup and drop off, makes it very reasonable. Listen to an audiobook
Yeah.
the whole time. I'm not stressed out when it's over. I'm not fighting traffic. I'm just sitting there waiting until I get to the pickup point, and then I do a little bit of work, and then get to the destination, do a little bit of work, accept the next one, and push it to the FSD, and there we go. And so it's very possible, in my opinion, that actually this technology becomes super complementary and kind of additive to the
Yeah.
rideshare community for years to come, because it just will take off 80% of the stress and the physical work involved,
Yeah.
while you're still making the same amount of money. Maybe it goes down 3 to 5%. We'll see. But even that, if you're doing 80% less physical mental work and you're making 3 to 5% less money, that sounds like a pretty good trade-off to me.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that anyone working in the AV industry should really be out there driving rideshare, driving for Uber and Lyft, delivering for Uber Eats and DoorDash, because this has been kind of my superpower over the past 10 years. Typically, when you cover a company, they don't also let you work at the company. And so
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think that's kind of been like my huge advantage. I get to see what it looks like from the inside. I'm an independent contractor, driver for Uber and Lyft. I get to see what promotions they're offering, what bonuses, what the sign up flow is like, what the product is like, what products they're releasing for drivers, how well they work, different states, different countries, different languages, right? I really have a lot of like unique insight. And a lot of people, frankly, have never been willing to actually drive for these companies and cover them. And so I think that is something that's been very unique and has given us a huge leg up. And a lot of these issues that AV operators, AV partners, ecosystem players are dealing with, or that might arise, or that they could solve. I think actually you can't drive for Waymo, right? You can only take it as a customer, but so everyone takes it as a customer. So what unique insight are you going to get if everyone's taking rides? I think you kind of have to look for opportunities to take that one step further. I think that's something that I'm struggling with a little bit on the Driverless Digest. We built up a nice following. We're covering the industry. We're doing podcast interviews. I'm, leveraging all the relationships that I've built up over the past 10 years to guilt trip, these executives to come onto my podcast. But I don't have like a super unique insight that I can actively tap into, right? Like I can go and ride Waymo just like anyone else, but I can't like go work at the company and see how things are working from the inside. So I think that's still something that I would like to figure out so that we do, look at the industry from a super unique angle. But in the meantime, obviously, still lots going on.
Switching gears just a little bit, how did those relationships that you formed over the past decade inspire the Urban Autonomy Summit? Tell us a little bit about what that's about.
Yeah. So basically, I've always gravitated towards, since I've been an entrepreneur, working online. I'm not a big fan of creating products, even online or physical products or doing things in person. I just love that I can publish an article or a podcast interview or a video. It might reach one person, or, our most popular video on YouTube, I think, has 7 or 8 million views. It's all about one of my Uber and Lyft drivers. He quit Uber and Lyft driving and became a trucking driver, like a big rig truck driver. Super random, very quirky video. Whatever reason, the YouTube algorithm loved it. I think we made $80,000 off that video. So just from the ad revenue alone. So that was obviously kind of unique and a home run, but that's kind of what I've loved about online. In person, physical, as you guys know, is a lot tougher. The margins aren't as good. There's a lot more things that can break. But I do really like bringing people together. I feel like every conference that I went to in the first 5 or 10 years of my life as the rideshare guy was kind of boring. It was like a bunch of people, oh, here's what it's like to be an Uber or Lyft driver, or here's what they should do or think, but they never actually had a driver or someone like me who was connected to the audience. And so with my co-founder Jonah Bliss, we actually started a conference called Curbivore, which is our in-person event in LA, kind of on the future of autonomy, mobility, delivery, public policy, a little bit of everything. And that I kind of like to describe as a festival meets a conference. So we've been doing that in LA, bring together close to like 1,000 people every April for the past 5-6 years. And then over the past year, we started doing kind of like what I call pop-up events. So now every quarter we do our Urban Autonomy Summit. So this is kind of like a half-day event focused mainly solely on autonomous vehicles. So we did one in New York, we did one in San Francisco that I know Ben attended, we did one recently in Detroit, we've got one coming up in Austin on October 14th that I know Autolane will be at, and then also we going back to San Francisco on January 27th. And it's sort of like, I think of them as like fun, quick, good get together, bring people in the AV industry together. So pretty straightforward, but I think the reception so far has been great, and we're having a lot of fun doing these in-person events.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know we're excited to be there. I know we're bumping up against time here, but where can people find more about you, Harry? All of the different spots. I know we've covered some of them already, but if I'm looking for more information on, AVs or rideshare, where am I headed?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the two best places would be the Rideshare Guy for anything Uber or Lyft driver related, and the Driverless Digest for anything AV related. I actually just hired a new editor for the Driverless Digest, so I'm excited to announce that soon, and we'll be ramping up the content there, doing one podcast every week, an article every week, and then our newsletter every Friday. And then, of course, we've got the live events happening every quarter. Next one will be in Austin, as I mentioned, on October 14th. And, shaping up, I think Austin, like I call them half-day events, but I feel like Austin and SF might turn into full-day events because there's so much going on in Austin. And I'm already like, oh, we got to do a trucking panel, because all the trucking companies are in Texas. We got to do a Tesla panel because Tesla and other companies are there. And then we got to do some obviously big AV, or, even just like the tech wave, like all of the investors and tech people who have moved to Austin. I think that energy is super cool and everything that's happened in Austin. So, in every city that we go to, I always love to kind of lean into, the theme of the city or whatever it might be. When we were in Detroit, obviously we got, we got Hyundai, or sorry, not Hyundai, we got May Mobility and Motional up there on stage, who are both backed by OEMs. And we did that kind of like owned versus on demand AV panel, and kind of just lean into the theme of whatever city we're doing it in. And then I always, of course, pick a good place with good weather so that I could play golf after the event. So great event.
Smart.
Let's go. Well, I'm excited to join that golfing event at some point.
Definitely.
To me in Austin in September. Cool. Well, with that said, I think that is the pod for today, Harry. We really appreciate having you on. And let's stay in touch. We hope to have you back on as kind of a regular in the future.
Definitely. I'll be back. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Harry.